Well, hello everyone, and good morning or good afternoon to you wherever you are across the world. It's good morning for me, and I have my coffee to keep me going, but I likely won't need it because obviously I'm very stimulated for this conversation. The inaugural six elemental interviews on my channel, and I'm so humbled to have my first guest as the wonderful and talented J.E. Hannaford. Welcome, J.E., and thanks so much for joining me.
It's an absolute pleasure, and good morning. And I think we're just nearly slipping into good afternoon here. So
Yes, so just on that borderline. Okay, well, it's
just on the borderline.
distinctly morning here, and again, I'm so humbled to have you as my first guest. I'm a huge fan of your work. I just put out my most recent video was my summer fall TBR. Sorry, spring summer, not summer fall.
Yeah.
Spring summer. Let's correct that. And the book, one of the main books on that TBR was The Pact, which is just absolutely gorgeous. You can see the emojis. You have some of the most incredible covers for that series, and of course, The Skin was a book that was one of my top books of the previous year that I read, and The Skin was just it really hit me in the feels, and it was such a unique book. It straddled for me so many genres. The characters were amazing. There were those twists in that book were phenomenal. But yeah, so again, I mentioned that after reading The Skin and reading Gates of Hope, which I'm not sure.
Yes.
You're certainly on my must-buy author list. So yeah, definitely.
It's always an honor to be on anyone's must-buy list. It really is.
Oh, I think you're on a few of those, not just mine. So I did want to ask you. Clearly, you have a very extensive background when it comes to perhaps marine biology, and your love for all things aquatic is clearly comes through in your work. Can you tell us a bit about your background there and why you are so interested in marine life?
Well, I grew up in Pembrokeshire. I'm Welsh, and I grew up in West Wales. So we spent huge amounts of time on the beach. And my dad was always elbow deep in rock pools. So many of my kind of memories of being little involve freshwater west, involve other beaches, and my dad finding fish and crabs and shrimp and everything else like that. And he was always really, it just meant that I really grew up with an appreciation for what was there. And so when it came to looking at university courses and what I wanted to do, it kind of felt like it was a natural place for me to look at. I mean, I like the coastal stuff. I am asthmatic, and at the time it would have been difficult to get my diving certificate anyway. So I am not a deep sea diving kind of marine biologist. I like the coast and the littoral zone and the change and everything that happens. And that's my space as such, that I'm the happiest in. Yeah. And I remember going around the universities, and there is a relevance to this one. Going to Liverpool University and hearing a gentleman called Professor Trevor Norton speak. And he talked to all of us there for the open day. And I remember walking out of there and just turning around and saying, I want that man to teach me. And I didn't bother going to any other open days after that. That was it. That was where I wanted to go, and that was the person I wanted to learn from. It was just so inspiring. The way he spoke was so eloquent and beautiful. And he has passed away last year, but he also is an author of a number of books about the pioneers of marine biology. And he wrote the way he spoke, which is very much then, although it's a non-fiction inspiration, very much an inspiration when I came to put together The Skin and the Pact for how I wanted that feel to be. Potentially, I suspect also why in those books it was very clearly first-person perspective, almost like that kind of autobiographical approach to it, which is naturally first person. So, yeah. And then I did get into that university, and I was lucky enough to live on the Isle of Man as part of the course, with the beautiful clear waters and basking sharks out in the bay and things like that. And wake up every morning from the halls of residence looking out over the sea. It was just an absolutely magical place to do my degree. And I loved it to bits. So.
Well, that's incredible. And I, as you're speaking and you're describing some of the places you've lived, obviously in relation to university and where you live now, just when I think of your depictions of the landscapes in the skin and the water, and now you're bringing me right there again when I read the book, and that was just part of my fascination with what you wrote. And that's really fascinating because I know that when I'm thinking about all this, I'm framing the fact that I had never previously read, and I'm not that well read, but I never previously read a fantasy book involving a Selkie. So that in itself, I just found so unique, and it just really drew me in right away, especially when I saw the cover. So can you tell me a bit about specifically why you included the Selkie and some of the other mythical creatures that perhaps we don't normally see in fantasy in the Black Hind's wake, which is the skin in the pack, the duology?
I love the Selkies. I think that the Selkies are often much maligned as being quite depressing. The sanitized versions of the folk stories that we hear, the ones that came further south that hit the mainland, and most of those involve Selkies having their skin stolen, being forcibly married, having children with them, and they're all quite sad, and they often end in death, and either the child or the Selkie has to leave, and there's anguish, and she's basically forced into this sort of hostage situation until somebody finds her skin. But those aren't necessarily the only Selkie stories out there. And I wanted to look at the more old stories, the Finn folk, those that are much further north, that kind of touch on the Danish and Finnish perspectives of them. And these Finn folk are much closer to, they sort of split at some point in mythology into kind of what we now perceive as mermaids, sort of siren types, and Selkies. But in essence, they were shapeshifters. And so I wanted to keep the Selkie aspect of the seal, but I also wanted to bring back some of that older stuff, some of the more shape-shifting abilities, the fact that they're less all cute and soft, and some of the Finn folk are perceived as being quite dark and quite very much grey. And I wanted to keep these characters having not this sort of depressing line, but they have their worldview. Their worldview may not align with our worldview, but they are doing what they perceive as the right thing for their worldview and for things as a whole. So with the Selkies, that's kind of, it took a lot of hunting down in that area. The sirens, I just wanted to do a little bit of a play with that, and I don't want to talk too much about the sirens because I don't want to spoil the pact for you.
Okay.
So there is stuff coming with the siren. And so I wanted, again, to bring the sirens in, and we know sirens are usually quite predatory.
Yes.
I think that's a fairly established. And so therefore they had to continue to be predatory, that illusion of the beautiful woman singing to entice men to their death. So I very much enjoyed bringing those two in. The White Hind is obviously a very significant piece of folklore from all across, specifically, I know it's all across Europe. It was very hard to find pre-Christian folklore in Portugal and Spain because a lot of it has been Christian washed as such, so it's buried in other things. But the animal folklore was still there. So those hinds were still buried underneath it. So I was like, right, I'm having that. And I'm trying to think. There are others that come in at the end of the pact that are the skin that are then relevant, the Tibicina, and various other creatures. So there are by the time you cross the whole series, a lot of the animals are there. There is, I'm probably saying it wrong, but I think they're called duende. There's a Portuguese folklore creature that I did manage to locate that is, or Basque kind of area, which is in the Pact. And then I brought in a whole load more Welsh folklore, including, because we've got to, including throwing in the Lady of the Lake. And some lesser known folklore buried into the Pact as well, which becomes quite significant. And obviously the gentleman on the cover himself, the Welsh dragon. So Lord Flame himself.
Wow, you got me really excited for the Pact.
I'm really proud of the Pact. I wish more people read it. I wish more people followed through. I'm very proud of the Skin as my first book, but of the two of them, I believe the Pact is the better book and the stronger book because it isn't the first one in that respect. I'm very, very proud of it, and I really wish more people would read it because I think, although I love Gates of Hope and Gates of Sorrow, I think the Pact is the best book I've written so far.
Well, that just excites me more. I absolutely love the Skin. So if you're saying as the author, the Pact is even better, that just fills me with joy, and then I'll be reading it shortly. I just want to quickly put up some comments. Luke's book Nook is here. Luke, a fantastic gentleman, great booktuber as well. Check out his content. Luke is phenomenal, and I know he's a big fan as well, JE, of your series and your writings. So I'm not sure if he's gotten to the Pact yet. I believe that The Skin was one of his top books of last year.
I believe Luke read it sitting on a beach somewhere. And one of the quotes that I cannot share because it was said to me in person as such was that I believe it made him cry at the end. I may be wrong.
Well, that's a great reaction. You're definitely
that was my best reaction I think I've ever had.
Yeah, well, you definitely have a skill with emotive writing, so I'm not surprised at that at all. Luke also has a comment. Jen's mashup of folklore and post-apocalyptic ecology in The Skin and the Pact is so unique in fantasy. I would definitely have to agree, Luke. That's a very salient comment. We also have the Rebel GM. Afternoon, Peel and Jen. Good afternoon, sir. I take it it's afternoon where you are. And also mentions, I cannot tell you how much I enjoy Jen's books, something unique and wonderful. And I certainly agree with that. I'm sure Luke does as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, of course, in the chat. And it's great to have viewers. And I'm sure that after this discussion that Jay will have some more fans and people who are very interested in reading her work. So JE, so you've given a bit of a background in terms of a professor who is an inspiration. It's just what a wonderful story, and thank you for sharing that with us. So if I'm not mistaken, you teach in the field as well. Is that correct? Can you tell us a bit about that?
I teach in school now, so I did do some field ecology, so I did my teacher training. The dream job as such was always to work in ecology and to work in field work. And I did get the opportunity to do that with a company that is called the Field Studies Council. So I got to teach children from all over the country about coastal ecology and things along that nature, which I absolutely adored. It was utterly a dream job. It is, however, also not a job that's very conducive to family because you're working with the tides. So you might be up at 5 a.m, you might be up and running around later, you might be quite late at night, you're lecturing till sometimes 6, 9 in the evening. So it's not a job that works brilliantly in the long term with family life.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful opportunity, and I'm incredibly grateful for the chance I had to do it. I've lost more phones in rock pools than I can count. Sit down on the beach watching people counting things and measuring things and showing them stuff they've never come across before, especially people who are coming out of the cities, coming down to the coast, who maybe haven't spent much time. And I absolutely loved that. And then obviously as life moves on, you kind of have to take a little bit of responsibility for where you're going there. And I went into teaching as a job that allows me to move around and allows me that flexibility a little bit. And so I've been teaching at the school I'm at now for, well, since 2010. And I teach, it started out as an all-girls school. It now has both. That's giving away more than now. But it is a really lovely school. And I teach all the way up to A level. So I still get once a year to take a bunch of students out onto a beach and do a big project with them, which I love. And I think they know me for being a bit geeky over my ecology. Not that many biology teachers love the ecology. A lot of them more prefer the physiology. But they know me for geeking out over the ecology stuff and running wildlife clubs and cameras on the grounds and kind of dragging cohorts of kids out to look at photographs and build stuff. And yeah, it's so.
I'm just envisioning all this, like you must be such an amazing teacher, someone who's so passionate about the subject, and you just seem like someone who would be fantastic at teaching. So
well, I'm not afraid to talk, so that helps. And my voice carries quite a long way, as anyone who's come across me at a con can attest to. I don't genuinely need a microphone in a big hall. But yeah, I do very much enjoy it. I have had a student come across me via Amazon. I don't share that I'm an author with students below year 11. So my sixth formers are aware, unless they're younger and come across me on their own, I don't share that.
No, I understand.
My older students do know. So.
No, understand, especially the content too, right? I mean, your books are phenomenal. Perhaps a lot of us write adult fantasy. It's not necessarily for children. So yeah, no, I totally understand.
The Skin and the Pact. The student who discovered me did ask, "Can I read your books?" And I said, "You can't read The Skin and the Pact." I said, "If you want to, you can read the one with the dog on."
Yeah, a lot more age appropriate, right? So
yeah, that one was fine. I was like, "That's cool. You can read that one."
There's a comment from Sean Barnes. Sean, welcome and thanks for coming. And he notes Luke's not the only one to shed tears over the duology. I was wondering if he's read both. I assume he has. And yes, very much the writing. Jay, I want to speak about that briefly. Your prose is phenomenal. I wrote in my review of The Skin that one of the things that for me, I was immediately sucked and drawn in because of your fabulous prose, but also when I initially read the first pages of The Skin, I thought I was going to read something that was more traditional epic fantasy, right? Because I'm reading, and then suddenly everything flipped, and I realized it was actually a lot, for me, what felt a lot more like a dystopian, a science sci-fi, and that was it was just incredible and so original the way you did that, and it was seamless. It wasn't some abrupt transition for me, but because of the way you wrote it. But I do wonder how you classify specifically your work, right? It's one thing for me to do it, but you as the author.
I had so much difficulty with that because if we're honest, there's a lot more marine, siren, mermaid stuff out now, but I was ahead of the curve, which meant when I was putting that out, there was nothing to compare it to. The Mermaid of Black Conch was out, and there was nothing else. There was stuff on the lists, and I was having to look back, and I remember trying to comp it to Joanne Harris's Blue Salt. I think it's Blue Salt Road, which again is a twist on Selkies in a very different way, and just struggling to compare it. But when I remember talking to friends, Lee Conley, and saying, I think the only way I can say this is it's a post-apocalyptic or alt-future folklore fantasy. And he's like, that doesn't exist. I know alt-future folklore fantasy doesn't exist, but that's what it is.
And that is,
it doesn't really still exist in that setting, but I mean, I'm reading a book that was recommended to me at the moment called Salt in the Wound, which is set a similar distance in the future, sorry, with another completely different dystopian twist on what's happened in that intervening period of time. And I don't know how much more folklore there's going to be into it. I'm about chapter 10, but there are references to some of similar things so far. Not folklore, but stuff that's in the Pact. So, but that was recommended to me as one set in that time span. But there are, as you say, there aren't many that don't go full on post-apocalyptic societies collapsed, and it's all about that infighting rather than it's collapsed, but there is still a world going on out here.
Yes, precisely. And I think first of all, I just want to comment that for me, you described that so aptly, but also I think that's part of the beauty of being an independent writer, that we're not so worried about qualifying what our work is. It's more about writing the work and finding the audience, and in some ways letting your reader decide what your work isn't. However, obviously you have an intent when you write it.
Yeah.
But the fact that your audience can just appreciate it without having to worry about what categories and subcategories and genres and subgenres it falls under. And I think that's part of the beauty of being an independent author. So.
I think so. I love that there are so many varieties and so many different things that don't fit in the boxes. I love the adventure that an indie author will take you on, because they're not trying to fit in a box. They're trying to tell you the story they want to tell. And I think it's just an amazing place to be part of at the moment. I think it's a fabulous group to be part of. I love it.
Yes, I would certainly have to agree. And in saying that, when I'm thinking about what the books I've read from you so far, definitely not preachy at all, but some really compelling, really fascinating themes. And of course, obviously, a lot ties back into your love and appreciation for ecology and all things marine and aquatic. Are there any particular themes that you purposefully, you think, try to incorporate in your books in that regard?
I would say that found family as a trope, as a theme, is definitely one of them. You can pretty much every time you're going to find some sort of level of found family. I try and make my worlds queer norm so that nobody stands out, they just are. So there's no big fanfare, everybody is just who they are. The people around me are very much like that to me. I've got a broad range of friends and always have. So they're just part of my social circle, and I try and reflect that in the worlds that I create. So those are two things. They may not be front and center, but they are, whoever is there is just there, and it's their world as much. So those two, and there's going to be nature and science, even if you can't see it overtly at the front, it's there in the world building in the background. There's going to be stuff. There's probably always going to be at least one bit of water.
Definitely. I would definitely have to agree. And in saying that, I feel that for someone like myself, who and I have to say, certainly not my area of expertise, especially when it comes to the aquatic marine side, someone who, although I love water and I love being around water, I'm not particularly, I'm not that deep into astrology, but I'm a Pisces. That's my astrological sign, and I'm drawn to water, and I love being around it. I feel that reading your books, I realize how ignorant I have been to a lot of elements surrounding water, and also just reminds me, although obviously in a certainly subconsciously, I'm aware of things like global warming and ecological destruction, and what we're doing as a species, what we've done historically to endanger our planet. I felt that theme very strongly permeating through your work, that that we don't realize to the extent the damage that we've done. We certainly don't realize, perhaps, or even if we do, seem in some ways very challenged and confounded to stop the onslaught of the damage we're doing, and that of course could potentially give us the future that you envision in the Black Hind's wake. Can you comment about any of that?
Yeah, I mean, when I was looking at the setting the world up for it, I knew I wanted it to be looked at almost, once I'd got the Selkie, almost through the innocent eyes, and in eyes of a non-human looking at the mess we'd made for the first time, effectively. And so it also meant then trying to work out where places might get excessively hot, where places might not, where the rain shadow would still be predicted to land across. So in the Pact, it's heavily based in the west of the UK, because that's where the rain shadow would be heaviest, and there would likely still be crops and things. Whereas the east, we're already in a position. There were photographs 2 years ago when we had the long hot summer, where there were satellite photographs of the UK, and most of it was yellow. And you could just see with the drought the difference in the kind of colour. And so that was also the point where I was writing the Pact and the Skin around when we had a couple of those really hot summers. So I was looking at those going, well, that's what's happened now. So those areas are dead. They're now the barren. So when you looked at those satellite photographs, and the coastline then was based off predicted coastline flooding. So again, models of where the coastline would actually be with 30 to 50 meters water level increase, because the theory is it's gone up and it's on its way down, obviously, in the Skin and the Pact. And yeah, so it was I wanted it to be seen, as you say, we are very much as a species quite selfish. And I think some readers have taken issue with me depicting humans as selfish and self-centered. And but I wasn't looking at it from a preaching perspective. I'm looking at it from, I am not a human while I'm writing this book. I am looking at us from the outside. And from the outside, we're not always nice. There are lots of good people. And I wanted to make sure those people were able to be there front and center. But there are also people who are very much self-interested, who are only interested in what they can get from society and their standing and their social ranking. And so, yeah, I did want to comment on that and how that might play out. You look at the world we're in now, we may not have kings all over the place, but we have people in those positions. They're the billionaires running the show from the background. Those desired positions of power are still filled. They're just not filled with a crown on somebody's head in every country. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter how we try and escape it. There are always those who want power. And I wanted that reflected in there.
Yeah, and I think you did an incredible job of reflecting that. Certainly in the books that I've in the Skin that I've read by you, and I don't anticipate that the Pact will be any different. And I think you as well, in reading the Skin, one of the things that I very much felt that you were conveying was that the cost of how to rectify and correct the situation may be quite brutal, maybe quite, and quite harsh. And, the characters, there were some just incredibly well-drawn and well-realized characters in the Skin. And however, I think you definitely conveyed the anger of some of these characters as to what has happened, and obviously they approach how to rectify this situation in a very subtle way. It's not all brutality. However, they do have to make some very brutal choices and enact some very brutal things to help rectify this situation. So, and I think that will initially have perhaps some readers saying, okay, well, these characters are very morally gray, but I definitely think we root for a lot of them in terms of what they're trying to accomplish, and one of those things, of course, is simply mere survival for some of them, right? And so I thought that was, again, it was so exceptionally well done. How do you feel about, in me saying all this, is your outlook optimistic that we can fix on our own as human beings these issues that we're confronted with?
I think we have the ability to. I think it depends whether those who are in charge wish to enable that to happen.
Yes, no, I completely understand and agree. And Luke puts up, Black Lines Wake duology does such a good job of balancing the self-destructive nature of humans with the power of love, family, and selflessness. Yes, I would totally agree, Luke. There is ultimately a very optimistic and hopeful viewpoint, I'd say, in the end, amongst all the darkness, and there is some beautiful darkness in your writing. I found that in both books, in Gates of Hope and in The Skin.
Mm-hmm.
I know we focus a lot about Black Heinz Wake, but Jay, can you tell us a bit about Gates and that series and what it's about and etc.?
I find Gates sometimes really hard to explain, but I've had a bit of a brainstorming, I suppose, with a group of friends and readers, and we've come up with the best way. One of the ways of kind of explaining it is you've kind of got the bonding of the animal magic that you get with Robin Hobb, with the dragons of Pern and the space dragons mixed in, and then they've got a crazy uncle like R.J. Barker thrown into the mix. So that's your kind of tone that you've got in these, inspired a little by some of the more classic epic fantasy, but definitely with a more up-to-date twist on it. They are less dark. They are probably more accessible across age ranges. This was always aimed to be my, I don't want to say gate, it sounds awful. The Gates trilogy was meant to be my gateway access for readers, potentially younger ones, before they move on. So that is where it kind of is supposed to sit in my entire plans, because I'm going back to slightly more skin-packed, darker stuff in my next kind of things I have lined up. So the idea of Gates of Hope is that we are, again, post the big event, post a big war, 500 cycles later, after the Watcher, a dragon, a mythes from the moon of Mythos, has shattered the interlunar gates, because basically the dragons got absolutely sick of being a staging post for a war between the humans living on Luce and the Aldrin living on Tebane, the outer moon of the system. So you have a planet and its two moons, and it starts with the gates being destroyed. So you then have 3 points of view, one on Tebane, one of these humans clinging to survival under the oppression of the Aldrin, and two characters coming from different places in on the main continent, on the continent of Caldera, on the main planet of Luce. So when I wrote this, it was the first book I originally wrote, so I was taking tropes and twizzling them a little bit. So we don't have a farm boy turned good. We have basically a bouncer from a pub as an adult going in and discovering that his entire life has been a lie. And these people who administered his world are in fact all in possession of magical powers, and he never had a clue. We've got someone from inside that society and her journey through the middle of it as an older teenager, and I say obviously this other individual, a woman who is older and has been described as untouched, is how her group are described, that they are not allowed to have children. They're trying to withhold the magic ability genetics so they do not get passed down. Because if they're discovered by the Aldrin, the entire Seraclave, the entire village would be killed. So, and it's their journeys of discovering for each of them, certainly for Darren and for Lissa, about the magic that they possess and the journey they go on, and how they deal with that, and how they deal with the individual situations, both in jeopardy, in different ways. Darren from Invasive Species that leaked through the portal many years ago before it was closed till getting out of hand, and Alyssa just fighting for survival. And then we have Sorin weaving through the middle, who's grown up in this society and is a little too impulsive, shall we say, leading to a change in her perspective and her priorities from thinking she was going to have a lovely, smooth, I'm going to go off, I'm going to learn magic, I'm going to meet a man, I'm going to have a happy ever after. And for her, things turn on her head. And how she then deals with that definitely comes from my teaching. She is not a lovely, likable, I can do everything teenager. She is the teenager I have seen day in and day out who tell me they know better, who tell me their mum doesn't know anything, their dad doesn't know anything. She is the teenager that anyone who parents teenagers will recognize as being ready to leave the nest. And I'm sorry to everybody who wants a nice, powerful Hunger Games teenager who's going to clear the world. That's not what they like. So she's not necessarily likable. And at times when I write her, I want to slap her. I'm very aware of that. But give her time. They all come good in the end. She's just got to get through being a rebellious teenager who thinks she knows best and just is unwilling to ask for advice.
Yeah, I that really and again your characterization is brilliant, and that definitely stood out to me in Gates, how well drawn, and for those of us who have been parents, and of course now I'm a grandparent, yes, I certainly could see why you drew her that way and how realistic that was. And of course, you're one thing that I love about what you do with your characters, and I believe all authors such as ourselves, there's always that balance in terms of how much pain and trial and tribulation we put our characters through versus how much growth and whether or not from that trial and tribulation growth is the result or is it regression. There's a lot of and with characters that are not necessarily likable, and I love characters that are not necessarily likable. That's and if you read my work, you understand that's a big part of. So I feel like it does take a very specific, and there's a lot of adeptness with your writing that it takes to be able to draw a character that realistic. And it was just from all your characters are brilliant, but that one stood out for me in Gates.
She's definitely Marmite. People love her or they hate her, and that's fine. And that's the one reason why I wouldn't specifically say that Gates is YA, because she's not a YA teenager. She's a teenager written from a perspective of an adult who knows what teenagers are like. She's not an idealized powerhouse of a teenager.
Yes, no, exactly. And quickly on that note, I know we kind of spoke about this earlier with Black Hind's Wake, and you did touch a bit upon it. So when people ask me for recommendations, and I've spoke to a lot of people about your work specifically, and they ask me, well, you talk about Gates, is that YA? And I say, well, I wouldn't necessarily categorize it as that. However, I would typically DM or ask the author or look at the reviews to see what you think before you make that decision whether or not
it is. I hate using the word because I don't think it's a good use of the term, but I suppose I'd say there is no swearing other than in world, and it is clean. I mean, I don't like using that term, but there is no sexual content. There just isn't any in Gates. There is relationships, there are clear inferences of people who are together, but there are no explicit scenes anywhere in Gates. So from that perspective, that's what I mean about being a gateway access. It's open to other people. I had somebody complain about Black Hind's Wake, that the skin had too many uses of the F word. I counted, there were 15. And several of them were descriptive. So I don't think that's an excessive amount in fantasy. specifically as it was only being used in either a descriptive term by the Selkies or the humans, who were soldiers, and is therefore appropriate use. But gates does fit into the category that I would feel comfortable with it being given to somebody's probably 12 and above, because there are a few scenes, certainly one towards the end of Gates of Hope, that is a little disturbing. Even if it is off camera, there is certainly one there. Potentially young teens, I wouldn't feel concerned about them reading it. There is violence, but I mean, my son's reading middle grade stuff at the moment that I would say has got more blood and violence in it than that does.
Yeah, and we all know that, for those of us who have young children who've played video games, a lot of them are far more violent, more violent and potentially disturbing than some of the things that, in terms of literature, that they can pick up that are classified as young adult. Right?
Yeah.
So those are some of. You've given us a bit of a tease into some of the works that you already have out. So can you tell us a bit about projects, things that you are working on or that are going to be released to some extent?
Oh, okay. So there will be a complete change of direction again with a cozy novella, which I hope to have out this summer. We're going for Gates of Sorrow next Friday, and a cozy novella, which I intend to have out before Worldcon, which is mostly done, but I've got a big push to go next week to finish the first draft off and then send it to my beta readers. I never know which one to say. I'm sure I should. And then I've got so many things I want to write. I have started something else. As I said, it is faster, it is darker. And I will probably, because it's in and it needs to come out, it's kind of screaming at me to be written. As soon as Unfamiliar is finished, the novella, I will probably write that. And then once it's written, potentially either polish it or put it to one side, and then I can finish up Gates of Hope, The Watcher's Gates, which will be the last one, with a bit more pace behind me, because I'll have written something fast. So hopefully that'll bring the book. I'm hoping that it will feed into the last book being a bit quicker, because there's so much that now has to happen to tie everything up, and I'm determined it is not going to overflow. It's going to be a trilogy. So therefore, I'm going to use this other project as a bit of a springboard. And the other one is it is darker again. It's two perspectives, and one of them is very definitely dark grey.
I see. Okay,
potentially black, as in his perspective on the very definitely not. So it's potentially writing from both sides of the situation, and who you choose to root for is going to be So it's set in a city as opposed to out in the wilds, but it does involve biology and insects and magic and conduits and implanted things and some of the fantasy tropes in the sense of some big houses. Ooh. And things along those lines. Some nice little thieves and some people in power who want more power. So that one is, but because it is darker, and that is definitely adult already, there is some very borderline scenes that I have run past people and they've gone, no, that's okay. So it's definitely darker, and I hope a lot faster. But again, there is family involved. One of the main points of view in that one is a mother of 2 children. So we have got a parent involved there as well. So I don't believe in killing family off in books. I like my family present. I mean, I did a head count on the Pact, and there was something like at 1.5 mothers, at least 4 mothers and a father with lines from the Black Hinds crew. So you get to meet Zora's dad, get to meet you get to potentially meet Lord Sal's mother. So I quite like throwing family in. So very much a Gates of Hope and Gates of Sorrow, although obviously Alyssa's mother has passed away, and it says about it. Her brother is part of her family very strongly, and she has adopted family in Latha. Although Darren is journeying on his own, he is sending all his money home so his parents can rebuild. And yeah, so I like using family, real family as well as found family. I don't like killing them off. So yes, that's kind of going to be involved in that one. There isn't enough space for family in Unfamiliared. It's too busy being silly and fun and daft, and just a light break between the seriousness of everything else at the moment, writing wise.
Wow.
So those are what is coming up in that way. Although I say silliness, there is a character, the one on the front of Gates of Sorrow, this gentleman here, is Eeyore in dragon form. And Tigger is also there in dragon form somewhere in the book.
Wow. That just sounds incredible. Oh, I can't wait. I feel very privileged to get these little teasers and insights into some of your upcoming work. So that's incredible. I just want to quickly note, Luke put up, PL, you're going to love the pack. I have absolutely zero doubt that I will love it. The hardest part is holding back from reading it. I might have to make in my next read on my spring summer TBR. There wasn't an order, but a lot of that is you put out the TBR, and then you have a bit of mood reading within the TBR, because I'm not much of a mood reader. But then so you kind of select the books that you just feel you have to read right away. So I have a feeling the pact is probably going to be next on the
I'm
TBR.
definitely a mood reader. I have usually at least 2 books on the go. One maybe more dark, one a bit lighter, depending on how your day's gone and what I can come home and feel like I can enjoy.
Yes. I'm not so much, as I said, I'm definitely a structured, TBR, established it, try and stick to it for the most part, with a few variations here and there. There is some latitude for within, again, the TBR, a bit of mood reading in terms of which I select, which book I select first, but I try to complete the books that I've nominally said I'm going to read. but I want to touch upon, so and I know it's not about comparisons, and obviously, I as an author, I'm sure you feel the same way. We're all authors, irrespective of what venue we're published in, traditionally published or self-published or hybrid or anything in between. One thing for readers, though, I find that there are a lot of readers who are always like, for example, when I talk about your work, when people talk about my work or other authors, it's a lot of ways to help readers find their way to authors' works is they're looking for comparators. So,
it's so hard.
So I know that, and obviously I believe you're friends and a fan. So for me, when I think about you as an author, I very much think about Anissa Spark, an author who writes brilliantly dark, very. I wouldn't say yours is quite as dark, and
nowhere near as dark as that.
Yes, and as you said, you tend not to kill your family members quite as ruthlessly, perhaps, as Anna does, and but I find that certainly in terms of the brilliant prose, certainly in terms of the themes that really sucked me in, I find there's a bit of a similarity there, certainly.
That's high praise indeed.
No, well, and well deserved. Do you have any authors that you would say, well, if you're going to read, if you've read so and so, read me, or if you like reading this author, you might like my work?
I find that really difficult. I think in some respects, if you look at more modern authors, I would say potentially R.J. Barker, some of those, because of the weirdness of the animals and the world building and things like that. I think there's that kind of overlap, although his work does tend to be a lot darker than mine, much darker than mine in places. The corpse lights along the ships spring to mind, and my ships would work. Sorry, RJ. But I think because depending on the series, with the Gate series, you are looking at older stuff, you are looking at the kind of Robin Hobb-esque, there is animal bonding. So presumably, although I confess I haven't read it, there are quite a few others with animal bonding out there at the moment. I want to say Threadlight potentially has got bonded animals and things like that in it. And there are a number of dragon books. I think a friend of mine was saying about J.A. Andrews as well, potentially. There's a little bit of overlap kind of tone in that respect. But yeah, because the Gates books are definitely more of a homage to old stuff with a new twist, it would be looking back at older. I'm not saying Robin Hobb is older, obviously, because everything, but books that are more classic as such. And I feel,
Yes.
I almost feel like a fraud even saying that, because she's just an icon in that respect.
Yes.
An absolute icon. So to turn around and say, oh, a bit like that. There have been times where I've thought maybe some of the stuff that Jen Williams has done as well, potentially, has had a bit of an overlap with the characters and the older characters moving through the world, that sort of thing, rather than it all being young. And so yeah, there's some, I think, potentially that could be, but I do find it really hard to comp. And the Skin and the Pact, I find impossible to comp. I need to look at a load of the new stuff that's come out and see. I know I have been compared with people, which was an absolute privilege to find I've been comped in somebody's query, I believe. But I have not yet read that book to say. I believe that was a traditionally published book. But yeah, I find it really hard to say. Joanne Harris's Blue Salt Road is one that I would pick because it was the Selkie things and because it's that little bit of a twist on the folklore, and quite a few of hers have a bit of a twist on it. Trying to think of bigger ones, as you say, that people would come up against. But I don't feel they fit as a comp with most dystopian stuff, because the characters are the wrong age. They're in the wrong place. I mean, Sal's pleasure barge and Lord Sal himself, I suppose. Lord Sal, you could say, was a little inspired by Varys from Game of Thrones.
Yes. I wondered about that.
If you want a poly captain of a ship who is not interested in anyone and anything with a pulse, and has his fingers on every pulse, Lord Sal's your man.
Yes. And a bit of that Machiavellian ends justify the means. Definitely, although it seems that the ultimate end of his cause is very moral and upright, the means by which that's accomplished,
he doesn't care.
Yes, exactly. So
he genuinely doesn't care. He'll do whatever it takes. The Pact, you get to see, is much more human, which sounds ridiculous when you've read Lord Sal, but a much more human side to Lord Sal.
Okay, I'm definitely looking forward.
He has moments of vulnerability in that, I think it's fair to say.
Okay, all right. I'm very much looking forward to the Pact. I'm going to come back and, if you don't mind, speak about authors again after my next question. However, my next question is about, we talked about all those, we asked you about some of your upcoming projects, and thank you for giving us those little tidbits. Very, very tantalizing in terms of what's coming up. You also have taken part in some wonderful anthologies with other fellow authors. Can you speak a bit about some of those?
Oh, okay. So I've got all three of them behind me. Obviously, Through Shadows was a result of QuaranCon, and the story in Through Shadows is actually a prequel to Gates of Hope. So the story that was in there was a prequel, and I was exploring Alyssa's backstory and how she is where she is. So that one does fit with my body of work as such, and that was part of their short story competition. Skybreaker is probably the most unique thing I've contributed to, in the sense that we built the world between us. We had meetings and conversations and built the world between us, and set a series of parameters that all of our stories had to fit within. there was much collaboration in Skybreaker. The concept of these portals and the rifts through time means that for the book to have continuity, it would be brilliant, because you'd sit there and someone would say, I've just thrown a load of snow through a portal if anyone wants it. It's like, there's a shoe gone through that one. And so these kind of discussions as to, you could look at things and go, oh, yeah, I'll have the shoe, or I'll have this. And so for my Skybreaker one, I had to say, I need someone, is anyone by any chance able to send a whale through, please? And Lee was like, yes, I can send a whale through to you. So so that one is definitely completely standalone. And it's in this kind of combined world, and yet it's across time as well, so different times. So it's quite tribal. I deliberately decided I was going for the most primitive of all the societies, I think, that are included in Skybreaker. And so we have whale riders and hog riders, and the whale riders are your higher tier of society, if you like, and the hog riders failed the whale rider test. And so your main character there, Tom, is on I think his 4th attempt to pass, because he keeps failing. Things just don't go right for him. So we watch as he passes, and then nobody sees him pass because a rift opened behind them. So he finally does it, and no one gets to see it. And then it's how that opens up from there. And again, that had biological implications, because if these rifts could go through anywhere in space and time, I decided, why not go back to the pre-Jurassic? And so I brought Deinonychus, the enormous, gigantic, bone-headed fish, through a portal. So it ends up with Deinonychus involved in it as well. And the green water was based off somebody had done a scientific paper, and I thought, oh yeah, I'll have that. And where their idea for the mass extinctions was their theory. I haven't looked back to see how that's gone with its peer reviewing, but their theory was that plants on the land had caused extra erosion, causing an algal bloom, which meant the seas went green, and eutrophication, lack of oxygen, stuff died. Mass extinction. So hence I had green water and gigantic bony fish coming through the portal. So I had a lot of fun, but typically in my form, I managed to throw something that actually was a real animal in. I mean, I've got pterodactyls in Gates of Hope and Gates of Sorrow. I'm not going to shy away from the fact the Zotrals are completely based on pterodactyls. And the wild beasts are also based on a proto-mammal that used to live on there, obviously on Earth. They're based on a proto-mammal. So that's those two. And yes, Skybreaker was so much fun, and we were very privileged for it to be shortlisted for British Fantasy Society Best Anthology last year, which was amazing. And the most recent, if I can reach it, is this beautiful thing here, which is Shadows on the Water, produced by LINKTREE Press. And
that is absolutely gorgeous.
It is absolutely gorgeous.
Oh my gosh.
And this is a collection of modern authors along with classic authors about short stories all involving the water and folklore. And so there are a number of Selkie stories in here. There are a number of all sorts of stories from different backgrounds, along with some classic authors. And there are Maori tales, there's Polynesian tales. There are all sorts of wonderful. It's a really good mix of marine short stories. And the one that I submitted to this is a prequel to The Skin and the Pact.
Oh, well, now I have to read. Now I have to read it. Now I have to read it.
It is the history of Stone Island and why the Selkies do not dance on Stone Island anymore.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well,
that's where that one fits in as such. So everything fits into one of the bodies apart from the Skybreaker one.
That is fantastic. I just want to quickly comment that, and I said this in my review, and I mean, I love the works of many of the authors in the Skybreaker anthology, but I said clearly in my review that Dark Whale was my favorite story, and it was just outstanding. As a matter of fact, That may be so far. Of course, I have the skin is always going to be near and dear to my heart, but that and I like the longer fiction, but Darko might be my favorite story from you ultimately thus far, because it was just phenomenal. And the way you managed to, your world building was just absolutely brilliant. It is throughout the books I read you, but to be able to compress and compact that much fantastic world building in the space you had to do it in within Darkwell
It
was
was the shortest story in the anthology.
just just incredible, right? Like, just, yeah, it was wonderful. So in any event, that's I need to read the other works by you with your housed within those anthologies, especially now you're telling me there's a kind of a prequel to Black Hind's Wake in there.
There is a prequel to Black Hind's Wake, and it did have, it was. You have Anna to thank for that one, Anna Smith Spark, because she nudged me into submitting to that.
Okay. Well, that's a perfect segue, because I'm going to speak about and ask you about authors that you admire, whose works you admire, and authors who are sort of like your must-buy authors who have influenced you. You've spoken a bit about some of them, but so I'd like to know, what does J.E. Hannaford turn to when she wants to read something? Who are some of the authors in your sphere, even if you haven't read their works, that inspire you, who motivate you, and who are some of your must-buy type?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I very much, I'll go back and then I'll come back to the more up-to-date ones. I suppose I very much enjoyed Johnny Wirtz. The first time I read it was the first time that I had come across a story where the tropes flipped. And I was like, oh, okay, it's all right to do this. And so that was very much a kind of eye-opening moment, was reading those books. They're hiding behind the skin at the moment. And amongst other ones, there were some other books that I think had a very strong impact. I haven't got the first one because I lent it to somebody, but there's a Fiona McIntosh series involving a witch and a curse. And there were scenes in that is the only book I've ever physically thrown across a room. Because I could see it coming, I could see it coming, and it still happened. And I was like, no, you can't do that. But she did. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's another kind of like, okay, you can. And I think it's probably one of those first times that someone killed off a main character that you liked, that I read. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, that again, it's okay to do this. It's not okay, I threw the book, but I did obviously pick it up and finish the trilogy afterwards. And again, from that same sort of stable of big inspirations, there's Mary Gentle's series, Ash, A Secret History, which I realise is quite dated as a current piece, and there are rape scenes and there are scenes that are definitely considered inappropriate to write now. But the style of the book, the framing of the two timelines, the way the whole thing came together, the fact that I got to the end, and it is almost the only book that I've got to the end of and gone, now I need to reread that. Because now I've got to read it with a completely different perspective, which is what I wanted to do with The Skin. Which is where that idea for the way The Skin is structured came from, in some respects. Obviously, slightly differently, because you only get the thing at the very end of Ash. So from those older ones, and I've got significant amounts of the big names on my shelves that I've read over time. I've got Tad Williams, I've got G.R.R. Martin, I've got Wheel of Time. My favourite Tad Williams series is the one that probably doesn't get enough time and space, which is the Shadow Play, Shadow March, Shadow Heart series, which I absolutely love. And within that kind of, that's the older influences, I suppose, I had. And I'd almost forgotten that Robin Hobb was an influence until I'd written Gates of Hope and then revisited it later and went, oh my gosh, I've got telepathic dogs. So it was a bit of a moment. And I read Dragonlance and I read Pern, and I liked all of those things. But then I wanted something a bit darker and a bit grittier. And the indies that pulled me in the first place, the ones that I read without realizing necessarily that they were indies, were this set. So Graham Austin King's trilogy. And I seem to recall I pretty much read them all back to back in 2 days. And then told him that I'd burnt my breakfast as a result. And that was also my first experience of like, oh my gosh, I can actually contact an author. And this author's responded to me. And I would classify Graham as a friend now. But, you know, it was a bit of a, oh, this is, and he was my gateway into indie fantasy. And from there, things just kind of grew. And I mean, obviously, Alicia is very inspiring as well with what she's done with her work. As people who I love your world building as well. I need to make more time to read the rest of those. I really very much enjoy that. Again, I like that non-Eurocentric world that's totally different. You've got something going on. I'm all for that. I think that's brilliant. But people that, I mean, the first Bristol con I went to, I mean, it's no secret that Anna and I are friends now. But the first Bristol con, I remember seeing her, and she gets embarrassed when I say this, but I remember looking at her thinking, oh my God, it's Hannah Smith-Spark. And it was very much kind of like, oh, wow, you know, it's the Queen of Grimdark. And she has laughed at me for saying that before. And yeah, I have not read her first trilogy because at the time I felt like it was a bit too dark for what I wanted to read. It is on my list to read. I think this year I'm going to revisit a lot of darker stuff that I really want to. There's a lot of books in the darker side of things that I feel I'm in a better place than I have been for a while. So I'm ready to dive back into some authors that have been really high up my list for a long time, but I knew I didn't have the right bandwidth to fully appreciate. But I do love both her Woman of the Sword and Sword of Bronze and Ashes. The Sword of Bronze and Ashes, I think I like a little more of the two. I love them both in very different ways. I think that they are quite inspiring, but I always suggest that people who read Anna's work listen to her read it first. Because if you listen to her read it and you hear the poetry and the way that she says it, it flows when you read it afterwards, and it makes the most perfect sense then. So I love that. People who else's books I love, I mean, like David Green, who I think deserves an awful lot more airtime than he gets, a huge amount more. I've got all of his up there. My I'm Feeling Stressed books, Wemby Olsen's Miss Percy. I love Trudy Sky's work. Again, completely unique. I love finding these totally unique books that don't fit into the pigeonholes of everything else, the ones that are different. So I've got my eye on Mushroom Blues, I think it's called at the moment, because I'm kind of thinking that looks like it might be off-piste enough that I think that could be a good one for me. But the whole community, Crystal Matar's books, I love those. And Crystal himself has been an absolute rock at points and supported me, and actually was the reason that I felt brave enough to go into indie in the first place, after conversations with Crystal. I could go all day. There are so many incredible people and so many incredible authors out there. Lee Connolly was, I have read Lee's shorts, but horror wasn't necessarily what I wanted to read, the horror fiction. But Lee's shorts, incredibly talented writer. And I know that when I sit down and read again, I'm going to totally appreciate. I love the quality of his work, the way that he puts it together. And so I can definitely see myself enjoying that at some point when I've kind of, my list is too big. There's too many people I want to read. Basically, as a support, just about all of the authors who congregate in Bristol once a year are an incredible selection of people. they're kind, supportive of each other throughout in every way. And yeah, I mean, I can't speak highly enough of all of them. And I'm going to also shout out Ida Keogh. Now, Ida does not get anywhere near enough, again, appreciation for her short stories. She's got one called Fish, a novella, which lives rent-free in my head. So, and it's about, well, you never find out what they're running from, but it's about mermaids. But it's not about mermaids as you know them. So I can see you looking that one up.
I'm looking. I just found it on Goodreads, so I will definitely, based on your rec, I'll definitely
that lives absolutely rent free in my head. That is one of those novellas that you read, and it's very clever because it's not really continuous in the sense that it's more like a lot of snippets of the same scenario from from a lot of different viewpoints, building this entire picture of what's happening, and a couple of them come back more than once, but it's wonderful and very different. And again, Ida uses quite a wide variety of language and is very fluid with the way that she writes.
I didn't realize she won a British Science Fiction Fantasy Award for short fiction. I had no idea. I wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for that recommend. I am probably adding her work to my TBR as if as you said it wasn't long enough. But no, thank you for that rec. That's amazing. And you gave some brilliant recommendations and some brilliant authors, many of whom obviously I'm a fan and admirer of as well, and who are just wonderful people and so supportive, in the community. And I am so excited to be going to one of the reasons to meet people such as yourself in person at Worldcon this year in Glasgow.
Yes.
My wife Debbie and I were our first trip across the pond. We've never been to Europe. We've never been to the UK. We've never been anywhere across the Atlantic. So that is the main thing that has us, besides seeing castles and heather and more, is meeting all these wonderful people, many who have interacted with and formed friendships and relationships with online. But now I'm going to get to see them in the flesh, and that is just. I don't know. I'm gonna have to probably bring a bunch of tissues with me in the pocket because I'm sure there'll be some really emotional moments too.
I'm sure there will be. There's people that as you say, I've never met from your side of the water that I cannot wait to meet. There are so many. Crystal, Matara, and I have been kind of not quite counting the days, but I cannot wait to meet Crystal in person. That's just. Yeah, amongst others, but yes.
Yeah, she is incredible. I've had the honor. Actually, it was Miles Cameron, who another very well-known author.
Miles is wonderful.
Yeah, that's phenomenal person. Who actually arranged a meetup for us. He had a friend rented out the top level of a restaurant in downtown Toronto, and got a bunch of us together, including MJ Kuhn, Crystal, myself, Miles, and it was just when you have those opportunities, and when you talk about BristolCon, I can hear, in your voice what that means to you. And that is my next focus, that hopefully Deb and I could come back in 2 more years and go specifically to BristolCon, because that's the other one that's really high on my list for a convention. It is to be able to congregate with and to feel that love and support from the authors in the community. That's one of the reasons I think it's so buoyant in terms of keeping us going, right? It's that collective support from wonderful people who understand what it's like to be an author and what that means, for good and for ill, And I think there's times as you indicate that were not for some of these support systems, it would be almost impossible to keep going.
It would, and there's definitely times, and I'm sure you have, when you're on your 3rd edit of this and you're sending it out and you're just thinking this is awful. This is awful. I can't. Yeah. And you send it out and you get feedback from people, and it's like, oh, okay, and just people saying, but I felt like mine was awful. and it's fine, and you love
Yeah.
fine, and I thought it was, and just that point where you finished it and you're like, oh, I think it's okay, and then you work through it a bit more and you're like, well, maybe it's okay, and then you do that last round, you're like, no, this is awful, I hate it. And and I've definitely been through all of those with Gates of Sorrow. So sending that one out and knowing that the people who were going to look at it were going to read it with a critically kind eye.
Yes.
And talking of critically kind eyes, I must add Justin Lee Anderson.
Ah, yes, another wonderful person in the community. Yes,
absolutely wonderful person, and incredibly talented author.
Yes.
And yeah. I am one of those. I love The Lost War, but I absolutely love Carpet DM. It's still my favorite of his books. So Carpet DM is like, when people say they want some comedic fantasy, a bit Terry Pratchett, but not, and things, it's like, that's the one you want.
Okay, yeah, I think that's on my TBR already. So yeah, that's
yeah.
definitely...
And I know that I know he has moments where I don't know whether the second one's done, but I know he has worked on it on and off as well. So I haven't had a conversation about that for a little while, because obviously the big series.
I think we could probably chat for 2 hours. I do have some questions that I really want to get in, but I don't. You've been so generous with your time. I don't want to. I know you're busy and you have pets and children and things to attend to. So,
child, yeah, and the pet is actually asleep next to me.
Oh, fantastic! Okay, well, that's
She's
amazing.
Asleep on the floor. I know it is.
time is rather fortuitous there. But I want to ask you, so industry-wise, so we talk a lot about, especially now, I mean, we do have nominally these two big arms of publishing, especially in fantasy and elsewhere. There's traditional, and there's self-publishing, and there's everything in between. As I talked about, there's hybrid. There's authors who write for small presses, etc. Now, where do you see, as someone, we're all connected to authors all over the map in terms of how they are getting their books out there. Some of them have switched back and forth. They've started out perhaps traditionally. They've gone to self-publishing, vice versa. They're charting new waters in terms of how they're getting readers to their books. Where do you see the industry going? You're self-published. Have you ever aspired to be traditionally published? Would you in the future? Where are things going? What's happening with the book, especially with fantasy and the...
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm noticing certainly more and more when you look at some of the bigger names and some of the higher sellers, more and more of them are starting to self-pub novellas themselves. Steve McHugh is very successful as a hybrid of both. And we see T. Kingfisher who did some of those both. And I think that those tried pub authors who want to write something, who've got the audience, but want to write maybe their passion projects, are going to continue to indie publish because that trail has been blazed and they've also got the audience. So they know they're going to get those royalties. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying that they think they're just basically, they've looked at querying, they're going to basically just indie at this point. If you've got an audience, they're going to stay self-pub. I think for me, I'm a control freak. I like my books to look exactly as I want them to look, whether that's the exterior or the interior. But that doesn't mean I would rule out maybe a small press that I could work with. So if there was a small press that would work with, potentially, yes. I don't think that I am willing to compromise my stories enough to be willing to look at big trad publishing, because I want to tell the story I want to tell. I don't want to write a story and then have them tell me I've got to chuck a boatload of romance in it because that's currently what's selling, for example. So that's not something I want to do. I realize to be more successful, I realize that to sell more books, I may have to grow slightly more commercial appeal and be slightly less niche. And that's something I kind of accept. And that was initially also part of the reason for coming back to Gates of Hope and Sorrow, is that I think it's potentially more commercially broad than The Skin and the Pact. It's got a much wider appeal, covering a lot more of the tropes that people like, but there's still no romance in them, not really. But I think this hybrid is going to become more and more there. The main reason why I would consider hybrid and small press, when potentially previously I wouldn't have, is actually the rise of AI, in the sense that having the badge of having been verified as a genuine human being and having somebody having that on one series potentially is certainly a reason why I think I would consider putting at least one series into trad. But as I said, potentially small press, because like even for this the one I'm writing, the one that wants to come out, I've already drawn the headers. I've drawn the chapter headers. I've drawn the symbols. I can see a cover in my mind already. But whatever happens, that won't come out until after the Gates is done, if it doesn't get pitched to a small press. And at the moment I'm thinking it might, if it stays short enough, because that's another issue, isn't it? Trad publishing is saying you've got to be under 100,000 words or we won't print you. And you look at indie and the books are still the same length, some of them longer. If you look at Ryan Cahill, if you look at Trudy Skies, you look at the size of some of those books, Crystal, there is a market for these bigger books.
Yeah, they're selling. They're selling.
And people are willing to pay for them, but traditional publishing isn't willing to invest in them.
Unless you're a big name. Unless you're a huge name.
Unless you're already a huge name, you're absolutely right. So I think that the kind of hybrid may become more common, but it depends, I think, on how the AI stuff pans out, because I think the ability to be more adventurous in indie is important. But I think the stamp, I don't want to say stamp of approval, but you know exactly what I mean, because of the way the field is kind of going, because of these kind of, I mean, I don't think it's as bad as it was a few months ago, but there was a point where in YA romance, and you looked in the top 100 books on Kindle Unlimited, only
I know where you're going. Yeah, I know where you're going.
It's kind of like just having that additional kind of like, I'm real. I mean, I think for me, Broken Binding support with The Skin and the Pact has given me that badge in the first place. I hope I am real. And I'm here. Okay, I'm not a robot. I can identify bicycles and zebra crossings and everything. So, but I do. That's where I think the advantage in having a small on your side, and potentially getting into different market bookshops, potentially that it's harder to get into as an indie.
Yes.
That would be my long term, is potentially this project I'm working on may go that way, as long as I can keep it under the word count. If it goes over, then there's no point in sending it anywhere, because it's not going to go anywhere. Unfortunately.
And I concur with so much of you said. Some fascinating insights, very, very insightful into the industry. And I know for me, I totally agree with what you said. I struggle to, I mean, we all know that despite everything as independent authors that is stacked against us, we've all, in varying degrees, obviously larger or smaller, managed to find an audience. Yeah. And that tells us obviously that there is an audience out there. Hence, there's an audience out there for these works that don't fit into these, you talked about boxes, into these neat little marketing boxes that traditional publishing companies.
And romantasy is such a thing at the moment. If you're not writing romantasy, some of the agents just aren't interested in even trying to pitch you.
Yeah, but at the same time, for example, I know that in my most recent book in my series, there's a lot more, frankly, romance and sex, and
it's
that
a natural thing.
Yeah, but that wasn't strategic. That wasn't because that was something that I always wanted to include more in my books, but it didn't fit the plot. It didn't fit into what I wanted to call for the story. Therefore, ergo, it wasn't in previous books, but now there was a reason for it. So
relationships take time.
Yes, and I wasn't looking to for the sake of selling more books, because that was the hot trend, to put that in earlier books. So, and that doesn't mean necessarily there's going to be more of it in future books, because again, if it doesn't fit with what I'm writing, then it's not germane to the plot, then I wasn't going to put it in. So I think that's also something that I love about indie fantasy is the lack of constraint, as you said, to have to, conform to, what is currently hot. And it doesn't mean, and like you said, I acknowledge that, we all want to sell books, right? So so appealing to commercial taste is something that, that's a consideration, right, with everything we do. But at the same time, I feel that we're able to essentially write what we want to write, and there is going to be, and to varying degrees, large or small, there is going to be an audience that's going to crave that, and that's also really empowering, and something that I personally didn't expect when I got into. I think I wrote the books. I hope to find someone who liked them. I tried to market them as effective as I could with the limited time I had, and I think I got lucky. I think, and just as you did, there is still, despite the fact you're a brilliant writer, and there's lots of brilliant indie writers out there, that there is an element of luck involved.
There's a huge element of luck.
Of who, a blogger, latches onto your work, and suddenly, it catches fire. And there's so many, variables involved in why some writers who are phenomenal writers, why their works catch fire versus others that languish and don't receive the attention they deserve. So, but it is fascinating to think about where this is all going, where the industry is going. I mean, I think that traditional publishing will continue to exist in some form or another. However, I tend to forecast, and I'm certainly not alone, that if we look at the way that the music industry has gone, with essentially independent artists now, dominating the landscape, and the big record labels, essentially shrinking to nothing, and people just putting out their music on TikTok and it blowing up, and I think it's volatile, but the volatility is very interesting as well.
It's exciting as well, because you aren't having a curated selection. You have, if you want to go and find something, chances are someone's written it. Or something of that nature. You just have to go put a bit more effort in to find them in the first place. But that's where all the bloggers and the community and people like you and people like Luke and all the big blogs, and Before We Go and Fantasy Faction, who was obviously one of the first ones out there in that respect, and all of these big blogs and Vampire Addict, and give people a place to start with the indie scene. And without them, I think it would be so much harder. But having that menu of books available that have been kind of looked at, you get a bit of a feel for it, a bit of a vibe. And Spiffbo does a similar thing, but obviously there's so much taste involved in that, that if you don't mesh with the person who happens, they're not your reader, then it's not your year. And it's harder sometimes, because of the sheer volume that those reviewers have to put through, for them to have, if it's not a book that meshes for them, then you're lucky if you get a good review, or a nice review. I don't mean that badly. A length of review that people can work through. That's what I'm after, not nice or good. A review is a review, and it's a person's opinion. And that is everybody's opinion on what their perception of a book is entirely valid. But with some of the big competitions, having the opportunity to pick through maybe only one judge's perspective is different. Whereas the bloggers, quite often I'll notice several people will read it in a blog, and you might get multiple reviews. And I know there's a couple of bloggers and Instagram readers who are not writers, who are readers, who my tastes mesh with very, very closely. So if they like a book, chances are I'm probably going to like it too. And some of those champions, Fantasy Hive, have been quite good at championing indie as well. There are some people doing really good work to help provide the buffet of indie books.
Yes, and you know what? And shout out to all the bloggers out there, people such as Luke. And I'm very humbled and privileged to be a blogger, to have been a judge for SPFBO, and I think it's funny because SBFBO specifically, it's Self-Published Fantasy Blog Off. For those of you who are watching and aren't aware what the acronym is, it is something that it's taken on a different sort of life of its own, because I think with the prestige and acclaim of the actual competition rising, and now Mark Lawrence, who's the architect, is going to change some of the rules in terms of admitting books next year. I think it's morphed into something beyond just what most people consider, a self-published fantasy contest. I think it's almost elevated in the self-published fantasy world, almost akin to like a Yugo or a Locust or something within the context of just self-published fantasy. Because, and I think, and Mark Lawrence has been very, very upfront about saying, listen, this isn't designed so that you can hopefully get a book deal because some executive from Orbit is lurking there and sees your book and decides to pick it up. But because that's been the result, you have the people like the Justin Lee Andersons. We can name all the authors who've managed to
advance, and they haven't all been winners either.
No,
they've been books that picked up enough of a snowball effect from having been read, and I think that's something that's often overlooked, is that it only takes a few of the right reviews, as you said, the right place, the right person to see it for something to just snowball. Luck, very much, even within contests like that.
Yes, and I think I'm very cognizant of the fact that, and I'm still I'm certainly not a famous or well-known author. I'm certainly not a famous or well-known blogger, but I'm also very cognizant of the fact that I could write a review for something like SBFBO, or not for SBFBO, just simply on Before We Go blog. Shout out to Beth Talbot and the crew, where I am part of Before We Go blog and blessed to be an assistant editor, that I could write a review and someone far more influential than me could like it, or perhaps even repost it, and that could get a book that might not always have a profile. So I think it's a huge responsibility as well, and I think that's something that I am becoming more and more aware of, that regardless of my tiny sphere of influence, that could potentially lead to something bigger if someone,
for somebody, the right person.
And that is, and I also want to comment at the back about the industry that, as much as I have my issues with Amazon, I'm sure we all do, platforms like Amazon and platforms like Amazon have actually, if you think about it, have really, in some ways, if you felt that as an independent author, it was a bit of at times, rightly or wrongly, if you felt it was a bit of an unlevel playing field, that the way people find their books now, predominantly, the vast preponderance of people don't wander into a bookstore anymore to find books. They go online, and platforms like Amazon, if you don't know whether or not someone's traditionally published or self-published, and if you just heard of Ryan Cahill, for example, and you don't know how he publishes, and you look, you say, okay, well, this book's got thousands of reviews and it's well reviewed, blah blah, and you buy it, whatever, you may not know, you may never know that it's not, because you look at his profile, you look at how well someone like Ryan's doing. Will White, and now we're talking about the really high tier, like. Okay, he's a self-published author, right? Brandon Sanderson doesn't need a publisher. What does he need a publisher for anymore? He can self-publish. He can self-publish for the rest of his life and still be one of the best-selling fantasy authors, ever. So I mean, the game has really changed, and it's wonderful to see in some ways how that's changed. A bit scary too. There's some things that are give you a bit of trepidation, but not in a way that would ever discourage me from writing, because I think for a lot of us, we write regardless, irrespective of what's going on in the industry, right? We try to adapt. We try to adapt and change, but we're just writing because we have stories that we feel compelled that bursting out of us, and I hope J.E., that you continue to write, because I love reading your books, and a lot of people out there do.
So many planned, not enough time, not enough hours in the day. There's more Black Hind stories in the back of my mind. There's 2 more Black Hind. It's a novella from Serena's perspective, and one from another boat, a story from another boat's perspective. So not the Black Hind, but a different boat. Another part of Sal's flotilla. So those 2 are sitting at the back of my mind. So I will be. There's plenty more to come.
Wow. Well, as I know, again, we're winding down here, and you've been so incredibly generous with your time. Thanks for coming. Before I get to closing things off, is there anything you'd like to say, just to whether it's talking about upcoming things that are coming out with release dates specifically, or things like that, or anything you'd like to say in general, comments about you and your work?
Well, at the moment, Gates of Hope is actually on sale for this week, for the whole week, as of today, in pretty much every territory at 99, whatever it is the thing is, unless I couldn't set it that low. And so that is on until Friday. And obviously then on Friday, it is time for book 2. And you get more moonhounds. You get more dragons. You get, and this is the one I know people want, more howlers. So more star, more of all of them. So more of all of those. And I am, despite having torn my hair out and gone, no, is this good enough? There is a lot I am very proud of in Gates of Sorrow. It is a middle book. You'll notice it is a shorter middle book. So I have not gone longer. So hopefully it'll keep moving things forward. And obviously at the end of Gates of Hope, Surin was left in a rather tricky situation. So we start with that and move forwards. So I'm hoping that has a really good launch, and loads more people will discover the Gates series as a result. I'm on some other podcasts as well over the next week or so. I think I'm on the Dripping Bucket on Wednesday.
With Crystal, okay.
With Crystal and Fletch. And I did an interview with Stephen Arion, which I believe is out on Tuesday. So so it's just kind of I put it down here. So of the new stuff that's been out this year, this was out in January, obviously, and it's wonderful and it's beautiful.
Stunning.
Gates of Sorrow out on the 19th, and keep your eyes peeled for Unfamiliared, which will be in the summer.
Oh, I love that title, Unfamiliared. It sounds fascinating. Wow. Okay. Well, I do want to also give you an opportunity just to have everyone who's watching the live or will be watching this afterwards, watch the replay. How can they find your books? How, if they wish to contact you on social medias or follow you, how can they do that? Can you tell us a bit about all your...
I have a website, which is www.jehannaford.com. So my website is there. The link is currently for the books is to a Ko-fi page. I am in process of trying to put my shop straight onto my website, but these things are never smooth, especially when it comes to international postage. So that is a work in progress. I am aware of that. I am on Twitter at Hannaford_Jenny. I am on Instagram at jeh.book. And I do have a Facebook page separate from my personal account, which is actually Blazing Wren Books, which is my publishing imprint. So Blazing Wren Books is the Facebook page, which is probably the slowest growing of all of them, but it's fine. And I can be contacted pretty much through any of those sources. I believe there is contact on the website, but that email is not hooked up to my phone. You are better getting hold of me somewhere else. That is one I check in on slightly less often.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, once again, Jay, I'm so blessed to have you as my inaugural YouTube 6 Elemental interviews.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, this has been phenomenal. As you know, I'm a big fan of your work, and I am also so incredibly excited and honored, looking forward to meeting you in person amongst a lot of other amazing people at WorldCon in Glasgow.
Oh, I'm very much looking forward to meeting you in person. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, in the summer. So this has been wonderful. Thank you again. Thank you to everyone who joined live in the chat. In particular, a big shout out to the Rebel GM, Sean Barnes, and to Luke again, from Luke's Book Nuke, another wonderful booktuber and blogger. Check out Luke's channel. He is amazing. And he ends off the comments with saying that I would love to revisit the world of Black Hind's Wake. Well, I plan to soon. I'm lucky I still have one more, at least one more book in the nominal series to go. But now, thankfully, we've heard from Jay yourself that there are prequels, etc., out there and more stories with that wonderful universe that she's built that we can enjoy. So
it will be coming at some point.
So once again, thank you everyone for coming. This has been amazing, and thank you so much again to J.E. Hannaford for stopping by. And please check out her works. There will be links in the video below where, as she's outlined, you can reach her and or check out her books. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people adding her books to the TBR if you watch this video. So
thank you.
Once again, thanks everyone, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.